LML in 13. The End of Ice and Fire, Part 2. Hey there friends, LML here again. Thanks so much for joining me for Part 2 of our Endgame series. Last time I showed you why I think that the gruesome White Walker corpse spiral nailed to the wall of Last Hearth in Season 8, Episode 1 is functioning as a symbol of the Night King tree, and why I think that it's actually giving us some strong clues about what needs to be done to end the threat of the Night King and to free the army of the dead from eternal bondage. Hopefully you've seen that, and the basics of it are simple. Night King was created at that Weirwood with the spiral arms of standing stones, and he seems to like to draw pictures of this place with the corpses of his victims, such as he did at Last Hearth in the Fist of the First Men. These corpse spirals are, on some level, serving as symbolic representations of his home tree. This is reinforced through symbolism. For example, just as the limbs of a weirwood tree have red leaves that are always described in the books as looking like bloody hands, the corpse spiral design at Last Hearth is made of limbs and bloody hands. The whited Ned umbers pinned to the wall at the center of the spiral design, just as Night King was tied to the weirwood tree at the center of the spiral of stones. And look, they both have those same old blue eyes. I've got you under my skin. I've got dragon glass so deep in the heart of... Okay, thank you. Now, I'm certainly not alone in coming to the conclusion that this corpse spiral at Last Hearth represents the Night King tree, which is encouraging. But that's basically step one here. The real fun comes with trying to figure out how the writers of the show might be using this symbol to give us clues. That leads to exciting questions like, why did that guy with the heavy parallels to Jon Snow just stab the corpse spiral with a flaming sword? And also, why did it then turn into a flaming spiral that kind of looks like a Targaryen three-headed dragon sigil? So here's what I put together. Someone playing the role of Azor Ahai and carrying a symbol of Lightbringer is setting fire to the thing that represents the Night King tree, and this seems like a clue about how to beat the Night King. This could imply setting fire to Night King's home tree specifically, or perhaps to the thing that we call the weirwoodnet as a whole, meaning the astral dimension that is accessed by green seers like Bran and Bloodraven, and by Night King as well. The idea is that the Night King's magic seems tied either to his home weirwood tree or to the weirwoodnet in general, and setting it on fire, in some sense, may be the only way to stop him. It could be a literal burning, or something more metaphorical, though with all the dragons and flaming swords lurking about, I'd guess that the fire will at least be partially real, and all the way hot. I left off last time by promising that this sequence, Azor Ahai setting fire to the Weirwoods to stop the White Walkers and end the long night, had actually been spelled out in the books many times through symbolism, that I had actually been documenting these scenes in my podcast for a long time. I've picked a couple of the very best ones for today, and I hope showing them to you will convince you that the books and the show are building towards the same general endgame here involving the Weirwoods and the White Walkers. And fire. First up is Melisandre and Stannis at Dragonstone doing their Lightbringer dramatic reenactment. Now, when I say that Azor Ahai needs to set fire to the Weirwoods with Lightbringer, I do not necessarily mean that Jon Snow needs to literally stab the Night King tree with a flaming sword. Although who knows, it could happen. Lightbringer doesn't have to be a literal flaming sword. It can also be a dragon, or a person, or even a comet. If the Night King's tree needs to be melted or burned, it probably makes more sense if our Azor Ahai reborn heroes, Jon and Daenerys, use a dragon instead of a flaming sword. Or it could be that setting fire to the Weirwoods is more metaphorical and that it's something that Bran might do on the astral plane, from the inside, if you will. We will get into all that, and by all means, comment on the video with your ideas about how this could play out. But I do want to tell you that the first time in the story that we ever saw a flaming sword called Lightbringer, it was actually already stuck in a kind of burning tree. The scene on Dragonstone opens with the red comet in the sky and the wooden statues of the gods of the Faith of the Seven already on fire, and with the burning Lightbringer already jammed into the statue of the Mother. There's no weirwood tree here, but this statue serves as a symbol of a weirwood tree because it's a carved wooden god, specifically carved from old wood, just as the weirwood trees have carved faces and house the old gods. Consider also that all of these wooden statues of the Seven are carved from the masts of ships, which are the next best thing to tree trunks. With 7 of them arranged in a group like that, they even look kind of like a grove of trees, a sacred grove, which is now afire. The chapter from A Clash of Kings that has this scene begins with these lines. The morning air was dark with the smoke of burning gods. They were all afire now, maid and mother, warrior and smith, the crone with her pearl eyes and the father with his gilded beard. Even the stranger carved to look more animal than human. The old, dry wood and countless layers of paint and varnish blazed with a fierce, hungry light. When the weirwoods are burned, the air is similarly filled with the smoke of burning gods, so you can see the correlation here. Now, in the show version, this scene is at night, but in the book version, it takes place in the morning, meaning that the night is ending here, just as the wooden gods are being burnt. Although we don't have time to go into too much detail on this right now, there is actually a lot more to the link between burning ships and burning weirwoods. For example, there's a legendary fellow named the Grey King, who sailed weirwood boats, and who was said to possess the fire of the gods for man by means of a burning tree. So, weirwood boats and burning trees together in harmony. And there's also something about a sea dragon. You can find out more about that in Weirwood Compendium 1, The Grey King and the Sea Dragon, as well as on the Disputed Lands channel, where Crowfoot's daughter has a great video about the Grey King. But back here on Dragonstone, what we have is a carved wooden god, burning brightly, with Lightbringer jammed into its wood. The maiden lay athwart the warrior, her arms wide spread as if to embrace him. The mother seemed almost to shudder as the flames came licking up her face. A long sword had been thrust through her heart, and its leather grip was alive with flame. The sword is thrust through her heart, everyone. Through the wooden heart of a burning god. In terms of symbolism, this is a great depiction of a burning heart tree that contains the old gods. This done, Melisandre begins feeling it and starts to talk about the prophecy of Azor Ahai, giving us a clue that the idea of sticking a burning sword into a weirwood tree has something to do with defeating the Long Night. Melisandre was robed all in scarlet satin and blood velvet, her eyes as red as the great ruby that glistened at her throat as if it too were afire.
In ancient books of Ashai it is written that there will come a day after a long summer when the stars bleed and the cold breath of darkness falls heavy on the world. In this dread hour a warrior shall draw from the fire a burning sword, and that sword shall be Lightbringer, the red sword of heroes, and he who clasps it shall be Azor Ahai come again, and the darkness shall flee before him.
She lifted her voice so it carried out over the gathered host.
Azor Ahai, beloved of R'hllor, the warrior of light, the son of fire, come forth, your sword awaits you. Come forth and take it into your hand.
And that's just what Stannis does. Hearing all this inspirational Azor Ahai and the Long Night talk, he marches into the pyre and pulls Lightbringer out of the carved wooden god and holds it aloft. This is a symbolic depiction of Azor Ahai triumphing over the cold and darkness that covered the world during the Long Night. And again, it involves stabbing a tree-turned carved wooden god with a flaming sword. That's a pretty nice correlation to our proposed endgame of using Lightbringer to set fire to the Night King's tree, or to the Weirwood net as a whole. In the book version of these events, Stannis' sword even burns with green fire, as Melisandre has coated the sword in wildfire to make it, look like a burning sword. And this may be a clue about green magic, the magic of the green seers and the weirwoods, being set on fire. It's green fire. Here's something else to consider. Making bonfires out of weirwoods is something that Stannis and Melisandre are kind of into. Speaking in terms of book canon, Melisandre and Stannis later go to Storm's End and burn the great old weirwood heart tree there, most likely an 8,000-year-old tree from the Age of Heroes. One imagines that he probably waved his Lightbringer around a bit when they did it, but either way, it's another example of an Azor Ahai figure burning weirwoods. Actual weirwoods this time, not symbolic ones like here at Dragonstone. Then, in a storm of swords, Stannis offers to legitimize Jon Snow as Jon Stark, Lord of Winterfell. But Melisandre and Stannis would require him to burn the Winterfell heart tree if he takes the offer, so he refuses. But if Jon does end up having to help set fire to the weirwoods in some sense to defeat the White Walkers, then this idea of Jon burning the Winterfell heart tree will be looked at as heavy foreshadowing. That Winterfell heart tree is associated with Bran more than any other tree too, since Bran sees through its eyes in his Weirwood visions and even speaks from inside of it to Theon. So, yikes. In A Dance with Dragons, Melisandre and Stannis burn more actual weirwood at the wall, and this is really becoming a theme here, when they demand that each of the wildlings who want to cross to the south of the wall toss a piece of weirwood into the bonfire. And this time, Stannis is definitely waving Lightbringer around in everyone's faces. The wildlings are, of course, fleeing from the White Walkers here, and notice how escaping them is equated with burning the old gods. Behind them was only cold and death. Ahead was hope. They came on, clutching their scraps of wood until the time came to feed them to the flames. R'hllor was a jealous deity, ever hungry, so the new god devoured the corpse of the old and cast gigantic shadows of Stannis and Melisandre upon the wall, black against the ruddy red reflections on the ice. The weirwood trees really do look like corpse trees, with their bleeding faces carved into trunks as white as bone, and with their leaves like bloody hands. And there's even a white tree wordplay thing going on. Here we see the weirwood corpse of the old gods, devoured by fire at the command of an Azor Ahai figure and his fire witch, fitting the pattern once again. In fact, only moments before unsheathing Lightbringer and opening the gates to the wildlings here, Stannis and Melisandre burn the Lord of Bones, who's glamored up to look like Mance Rayder, in a weirwood cage. The Lord of Bones, aka Rattleshirt, is definitely a White Walker symbol, with his bone-white armor to match the bone-white skin of the White Walkers, and the general connotation of the Lord of Death, which comes along with dressing up as a skeleton. And anyone who is the king beyond the wall, like Mance Rayder, can play that role as well, since the Night King is the real king beyond the wall. And again, there's more book symbolism to back this up. So, that's a Night King figure burned inside a weirwood cage at the wall, y'all. And as he died screaming, Stannis Baratheon drew Lightbringer. The sword glowed red and yellow and orange, alive with light. Jon had seen the show before, but not like this. Never before like this. Lightbringer was the sun made steel. If we imagine Rattleshirt disguised as Mance, as playing the role of the Night King, this is a home run for our theory. Burning the Night King inside a weirwood cage at the wall, as Lightbringer shines as bright as the sun. This really seems like a glimpse of what the endgame might look like. Several heroes working together to trap and contain the Night King while his weirwood tree is set on fire, which contains and consumes him. This is the big hint about how to destroy the Night King. Turn his weirwood tree, the source of his power, into a burning weirwood cage. Again, we think of the blue-eyed, whited Ned Umber, who seemed to be playing the role of Night King, pinned to the center of the spiral diagram of the Night King tree, while it all burns. It's a symbolic burning weirwood cage for the Night King. Returning to the scene of Mance Rayder's burning, we look around and, oh hey, there's Jon Snow's Azor Ahai. Hey, Jon. Jon actually uses an arrow to put the glamored Rattleshirt out of his misery before too long, so Jon is even implied as delivering part of the blow that ends the Night King, and doesn't that make sense? All right, did you enjoy that? I promised Azor Ahai burning weirwoods, and I think we're off to a good start. You gotta love how the first Stannis Lightbringer scene takes place at Dragonstone, home of House Targaryen, and the place where the show has depicted spiral images in the caves alongside White Walkers and a bunch of other cool shit that I broke down with History of Westeros in their video Caverns of Dragonglass, which you can find on their YouTube page. I really can't wait to see if there might be similar cave drawings at Dragonstone in the books. And I'd also recommend Grey Area's video positing that, at least in show canon, the Targaryens may have modeled their three-headed dragon sigil off of the spiral designs that they saw in the caverns. And this is why the burning Night King corpse spiral resembles the Targaryen dragon, and I think that makes a lot of sense. I'll see you again soon with part 3, where we'll break down the most epic Dragon Rider versus Dragon Rider battle in recorded history, one that acts as a perfect model for the eternal clash of ice and fire. We'll find more symbolism of Azor Ahai shutting down the weirwoodnet in order to defeat the White Walkers, and even stabbing weirwoods with a sword, like literally. And this time, dragons. Also, I'd like to invite you to come join me and the Mythheads and other honored guests every Sunday for Nowie. Now our watch is ending. At 3 Eastern, we do a pregame show, and then we do a live post-game reaction show right after the HBO episode is done airing. Thanks again for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and you can find all of my material at lucifermeanslightbringer.com, including the link to our Patreon campaign if you want to support the podcast. See you next time.